soaking. So, but I have for tonight, I just want to say, make a few points, hopefully to support you in your inquiry and your investigation, and also in your living. So this week I had an experience talking to a friend, and this is a friend who had been through something difficult with their teacher, their Dharma teacher, their teacher of many, many years. And many of you know that there's a whole array of teachers, and there were waves of this kind of in the 70s and 80s, but it, continues. Teachers who really betray their students in a whole bunch of ways, and cause havoc and harm with their behavior. This is a very painful kind of phenomena, which happens all too often in, I think, in spiritual circles and in kind of the meditative traditions. I don't know that it happens more there than other places, but it certainly has an added layer of pain and betrayal. And as I was talking with this friend, I was listening and reflecting and sharing, just trying to be with them in this. And this wasn't new, but there are kind of layers of it that I think come up. And then I noticed myself at the end, just sort of trying to share some perspective and about the nature of awareness and how it doesn't depend on a teacher, and it's yours, and it's not located in the tradition, and all of that. I think all of what I was saying, I very much believe, and it's true. But it really struck me afterwards how easy it is to say these things, and how different it is when you're living through anything, right? And I feel that as a tension sometimes, actually often when I'm teaching, the tension is this stuff is, it's easy to say, right? And it's easy to sound wise and to give advice, or I try not to give too much advice, but it's easy to kind of give the teachings in a way that's just, oh, that's so simple. And I was just really struck in my reflection after that conversation of just how off my comments seemed to me, or how empty, even if they were technically correct, sort of like really missing something. I think this is, so I wanted to just mention that because I think there's a way when so for all of you who are, practicing and really trying to include your experience with awareness, you're practicing daily and cultivating stability and trying to learn from what's happening in here, both the content and the process, and kind of looking into the nature of your own consciousness, I just want to acknowledge how, when you're engaged in that territory, there's no other way it's supposed to be. And often it's really hard, right? I was just thinking about this situation. Your teacher, even if they don't do anything directly to you, but they do something that explodes your understanding of what they are or who they are. Just the layers of ripple that will have on the psyche, they're just inevitable. And it's inevitable that will hurt your faith, right? In the Dharma and in your own self, in your own beingness, right? Even if you know on some level that that's your awareness that you've been in relationship to, that's going to ripple through so much. And that's why how we behave and show up is so important. So anyway, I'm not sure if I'm making this point clearly enough, but I really want to continue to land in this. Nobody can tell you how to practice. I can give guidance, and the tradition can have all this guidance, but it's really yours to grapple with, right? And anytime you're meeting your experience, as simple as the instructions may have sounded, or you asked a question in the Sangha and I said something, I just think subtly or not subtly, we can sometimes, when we're engaged in the territory, compare the way it is to what we heard, or the way it sounded, or the way we think it's supposed to be if we were practicing correctly, right? I could just imagine my friend leaving that conversation and saying to themselves something like, oh, how come I'm not recognizing that this is my awareness, and how come I'm letting this situation affect me, which would be totally wrong. Of course it's affecting. Of course it, is like an explosion in your own psyche because you've been immersed in that, merged in that for a long time, right? So there are going to be these ripples, just like in any relationship that ends, or any relationship in which there's betrayal, there's going to be, or pain, there's going to be just ripples, and that's the territory of practice. So I'm saying this both, I guess I'm making a teaching out of it, but just as a, as a kind of hopefully a way of encouraging you to just stay with the territory, yeah, without making a should out of it, yeah, or even a simple teaching. Because it's so messy. I know this from my own practice. When you're engaged with your own mind, it's so messy and so unclear so much of the time, and I've had countless times on retreat when, even after years of practicing, I was, weeks in or something, immersed in some territory that was very unfamiliar or really challenging, and thinking, what are the instructions again? What am I supposed to do? How to be? So I just think that's really, the way you are being with your experience, that's just continue. Continue to explore without a should about how it's supposed to be, how soon it should resolve, how much perspective you should have, how it's supposed to feel. Those are all, I think, real obstacles. They become obstacles to us just being with and learning from our experience, your experience. And, of course and I do think that helps us to sort of slowly start to shift out of this orientation that this is somebody else's practice. This is somebody else's thing. This is this teaching that's outside of me that I'm trying to get into, right? Or there's this way of doing it. Yeah. It doesn't mean you can't learn and improve, but that's or that this awareness belongs to somebody else. So I think that's when those layers are not so present and you're just meeting your experience. There you have the Buddha knowing the Dharma. You have, lucid wakefulness knowing the truth of experience. And it doesn't always feel that way, right? When you're in some very messy territory, unbearable grief or fear or confusion, when you're in hurt or betrayal, or just anger, it may not seem as clear as, lucid awareness and experience. You can remember the teachings, but also be where you are. That's, as you can hear in all of these teachings, that the core of it is you meeting your experience right here and now. And the learning comes out of this. And that's what my job is, really, to support you in that, to help you stay in that, and to kind of, or encourage you to stay in it. I can't help anybody to stay in it. And then to hopefully provide some of the view elements or the kind of framing elements that are, not that I didn't make up, but that are part of this tradition to help us orient in relation to experience. Yeah. But again, it's your orienting. So that's something that's a tension I feel all the time talking. It's like so easy to talk, and sometimes I want to, of course, I want to be here to support you all, but sometimes I want to keep my mouth shut and just practice. But but also I do recognize that there is a way of supporting and just being here and talking, even if the talking is not the thing. And I feel so acutely so much of the time how much the talking is not the thing. Okay, so that's one piece. And the other piece that I want to come back to is the note that I am trying to hit every time, which is just referring you again and again back to your own basic wakefulness. This seemingly trivial but actually foundationally important truth that the world is not just happening, it is appearing to you. You are not just happening. All of this that you call you, me, it's appearing in awareness. It is illuminated by something, by you. Whatever you are, you illuminate all of this, including this body mind. That's how it's experienced, all experience. We don't notice this. When this is registered in a direct way, it changes our relationship to this phenomenal world, including this body and mind. This kind of luminous presence that allows this to be experienced changes our relationship to all that is experienced. I never feel adequate to talk about this in the sense that it's very hard to, I find, maybe it's just my lack of skillfulness to do this simple truth justice in terms of how to help it to be noticed. And it may seem completely unprofound or unimportant also to you. So what? Yeah, this is happening. But I hope you will take it as I hope it will at least awaken a curiosity that there might be something very important here. As we are always, and without this recognition, we are always locating ourselves in the content of experience. Right? It's just me and my life that's happening. My mind, my feelings, it's a very limited and confined situation. And the key aspect to beginning to unhook from the deep habit of identifying with the very transient phenomenal experience that is arising through the senses and the world, through in the mind and the body, these moment by moment changing ephemeral experiences. The key to unhooking that identification lies in this luminous presence that is here throughout all the experiences. And this luminous presence that's here throughout all these experiences is not something you need to get from me, from some tradition, from some special somebody. It is something that is here now, and it is you. It is your nature. Even people sometimes been practicing a long time. Sometimes because there's a tradition, it's easy to not quite let that last layer, or I don't know if it's a last layer. I shouldn't say last layer. Isn't this stuff, you don't want to keep saying it's the last layer, unless it is, but it seems to keep being layers. But big aspect of unhooking is this recognition that this is, you are this, not that this is like some experience you have. Yeah, I had this experience. There's some other aspect because, oh, there it is. It's the nature of the mind that so-and-so talks about. It's the, the nibbana that so-and-so talks about. This is your nature. It's you. In that, it doesn't belong to any tradition. That's the radical thing about it, I think. Yeah, and when we touch into this luminous beingness, that doesn't, it's not like this big explosive, some people think, oh, luminous, anytime you say luminous, I was like, oh, but luminous, like you turn on the light and the room is illuminated. Similarly, consciousness illuminates experience. It's just a basic functioning thing. It's not like a wow thing, and yet it is it's profound. Yeah, the implications of it experientially are very profound. Yeah, because it means a shift from what we take ourselves to be to something that is more foundational. So where we rested ourselves for stability, it starts to seem very unstable as we kind of recognize that which is here throughout, which is stable because it can't be like space is stable, right? It doesn't can't be broken apart or can't be partial. Those words don't make sense. So maybe for some of you it's boring that I talk this way all the time, but I've been just feeling into, this is what I want to talk. This is what I want to talk about. This to me seems like the most important thing to talk about. There are a lot of important things to talk about in the world in terms of what we need to do as a culture, and those are things that many of you know more about than I do. But this aspect is something that I feel I want to share about, because I think it has a tremendous value potentially for any of us who are interested in recognizing this aspect of our own beingness. So again, one of my teachers in the coming out of the tradition that he was in, the Chan tradition, one aspect of that, one kind of school of that is, but they talk about silent illumination as a description of a practice in a way, but also a description of the nature of being itself, although they don't use that term. Yeah. The silence is the silence of non-grasping, non-clinging, kind of identifying with the content. And the illumination is the basic illumination that consciousness allows for. It's already illuminated. So this, as we inhabit presence, you don't have to say, oh, it doesn't seem that luminous. You just say, is experience happening? Then it's illuminated, yeah. But as we start to inhabit presence or being, then this luminosity just becomes more like a feature, recognized as a feature of experience, almost like a background to everything that's happening. And that little background involves a tiny shift that's very significant. It's very hard to describe, but it's almost like some aspect of the psyche just starts to cling less to the content. And then there's just some sense of spaciousness, even within the challenging territory of this human life. Yeah. It doesn't make painful experiences pleasant. No, it doesn't. Yeah. But it changes our relationship to all of the content. It also changes our relationship to our own personality. Yeah, it will change your relationship to this body, even just the body. Because when we're not identified with experience in that way, when we could call it transcendent being or luminous being becomes more your primary identity, then this is all just more okay to be the way it is. more okay. Yeah, including your, your weird personality. I'm speaking for my speaking for myself. Weird personality. Okay. And then there's another layer which I think is still good to talk about, which is that this luminous presence, this luminous beingness, as this starts to be recognized more as our primary identity, primary just in the sense that more, permanent's not exactly the right word, but more elemental than all of the, even the thoughts, the feelings, the changing experiences, as that starts to become more as more a primary identity. It already is, but as we start to recognize it as such or inhabit it as such, it's easier to recognize it shining out of everybody else, shining through everybody else, even when the conditioning is really thick. Because that luminous presence, and I will just say, I don't think it's different in different beings. There's a lot, all of this phenomenal content is different in the sense that, different life histories, different bodies, different genetics, different makeup, different ethnicities, different historical experiences, different, all of that is different. Everything on the conditioned level is diversity in that way. And yet, as we start to be more familiar with luminous presence, with being, with this kind of base, whatever words you want to call it. You see, I'm using different words, lots of different words, just in case some of them land with you. As that starts to be more recognized or familiar, again, that's what we start to see in others and their uniqueness and diversity. So it's not one or the other, but that piece is what really allows us to have the visceral sense that you could be reborn in anybody's experience. It doesn't mean you know other people's conditioned experience. That's really important not to mistake. Say, oh, luminous consciousness, we all have it. I know what it's like to be you. No, you don't. Yeah. Each of you has had a lived experience that nobody else knows, really, from the inside. So that's very important. It's not that. And yet this luminosity, we can recognize that in others. And that is something it's profoundly connecting, because that allows me to know, not only I could be you, but I am you in a sense. Even if I don't know what your life has been, in a sense, I am you. And this is possibly recognizable with all sentient beings. So I like to mention this. I like to talk about it. I like to point to it. I like to remind us of it. I like to, sometimes just when we talk about anything, then it becomes, sometimes we can even just evoke the noticing. You point things out in the environment. If you go for a walk with somebody who's an experienced bird watcher and they point out all these things that maybe you didn't notice, oh yeah. It's not that they weren't there. It's that I didn't know to notice that. I think a lot of the teaching is like that. Some of it is practice instructions that are to be followed on your, to be cultivated. And those also include that kind of pointing, what to attend to, in what way. Yeah. And then a lot of these kinds of teachings, just like pointing out, oh yeah, there it is. And then because your experience is that, then potentially it can be noticed, oh yeah, have a sense of that, even if I don't sense it fully, or there's something there, and that, yeah. So when I talk this way, if it feels totally, abstract or what have you, then at least you know my instructions for how to practice, right? Which are completely in line with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is something we'll go much deeper into in the fundamentals group, but which I've written about to the group and talked about, and you can find it on the website, things I've written about 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's an old teaching. You can look it up. You can look up the text itself and get most of it from that. But that is the method of applying attention, awareness, moment to moment, that allows for this unfolding to happen. So that's a simple way to know. Attending to the breathing, that's attending with breathing. Attending to feelings, that's presence with feelings, pleasant, unpleasant. Presence, aware with emotions and mind states, that's beingness, illuminating, mind states, emotional states. The world as it appears to the senses, hearing, seeing, smelling, the 6 sense bases, awareness, illuminating, allowing for the sense consciousnesses to arise. Okay? Or you could go like this. I went like this, but you could go like this. So however you want to do it. It doesn't have an orientation, but so that's on a practical level, just mindful with what's happening right now. Okay. So I think now I'll take a few moments and just look at some of your questions. And okay, let's start with this first one. Regarding awareness, if I can feature different things to be aware of, it feels like there is an I that is doing the featuring and not awareness itself. When I move intentionally from one focus to another, and sometimes I'm lost in thought altogether, awareness starts feeling like anything else that arises and passes away. Great. So I would ask you, what notices, how do you know that you're choosing to feature one thing or another? How do you know that? What allows you to know that? I'm not going to say more about that now. I want that to be a question. Any of you can take this and look. Yeah. When you move your attention, say, oh, I'm meditating now. Put my attention on the breathing, breathe in and out. Now move my attention to this, aware of the thinking. Now move it back to the breathing. How do you know that's happening? And it's very much our habit to be identified with whatever it is that moves the attention. But we're always used to being identified with whatever it is. But that piece, that sense of me as the doer, we're very identified with. So what notices that? Whether, I'm not saying there's no I or there is an I or not, just what notices the choosing, the moving, the focusing, the thinking to change, the moving of the attention. How do you know that's happening? So investigate that, and let's talk about it next time, where you can, I would like to hear what you notice. And then awareness feeling like anything else that rises and passes away, I just say, yeah, you know, it's because you're, you know, when you're not attending to something that's here all the time, you could think it's not here all the time. And it's hard to recognize it as here all the time. So you say, and sometimes I'm lost in thought altogether. Who knows that? How do you know you're lost in thought? Yeah. So I'm pointing you to a way, you know, to start to notice uh, something about this. How do you know you're lost in thought? You say, I had it and I lost it. People say that all the time. Oh, awareness. I was like, oh, it's here. I'm just aware and sick, and then I lost it. Yeah. What's your experience like now, having lost it? How do you know you're having the experience of losing it? How is that appearing? Yeah, so we're very used to identifying awareness as a kind of experience, but it's not an experience. Okay. Here's I think, an important question too. I want to ask a question about dealing with emotional burnout or mental health during mindfulness practice. I can feel so positive and uplifted during meditation that I go through periods of being overwhelmed and really drained by everything. Oh, and then I go through periods of being overwhelmed and really drained by everything. I'm learning to have acceptance in those times, but I have a hard time focusing on meditation or any of the practices, I assume, at those times. You're a human being, and life can be incredibly overwhelming, physically, emotionally, mentally, logistically, in every way, relationally. So so sometimes you feel uplifted and there's a reprieve, and that's beautiful that you feel that way. And other times life is just maybe more than your capacity to be with. The state of your own mind is more than your capacity to be with at that time. And that's the way it is. I'm saying that so that you don't think you made a mistake. Anything you're cultivating, your capacity will be limited at times. And so on a relative level, gentleness is important. Taking care of your relative vehicle in terms of how you care for yourself when you're overwhelmed, all of that is important. But also there's something here, maybe, in this question that, awareness, you say, so maybe you say, like, I'm too tired to practice, or it's hard to focus on meditation. When things are overwhelming, you need a refuge. And sometimes we think, oh, well, meditation is not a refuge, right? Because I'm just now I'm more aware of the pain or the discomfort or something. So those are the times when I would encourage you to and yet those are the times when we most need a touch of the unconditioned, or a toe in the waters of the being that is not, can't be born or destroyed. So sometimes it's a way just of adjusting how you practice. So maybe you're not like sitting and breathing and being with all of the various states. Maybe you take a walk, or you lay down on the ground, or you go out in the woods and you sit by the root of a very stable tree. You look out over the hills. But see if you can touch into, is there something here, some aspect allowing this to be known, to appear? And you can even just say, oh, if I couldn't see or hear or smell or taste or touch or feel or think, is there something here anyway? Some beingness, some aspect of I amness or presence. That's here. Yeah? You might want to just explore that a little bit, because that is here even in the midst of overwhelm. And sometimes the overwhelm is the content. The content is so much. Yeah? And so this is where sometimes it's useful to come back to the subject. Subject, not like me, who I think I am, but to beingness. Yeah. And so that's something we can start to rest in sometimes. Sometimes you literally turn your attention from the objects and just like rest in the beingness. Everything can be falling apart, and yet what is still here? What if everything fell apart? What is still here? Because a lot of times the overwhelm is actually us trying to hold together the conditions. Yeah. Now, sometimes it's just there's too much. Say if you're a mental health worker or something, and you're overwhelmed by other people's sorrow and energy and stuff, still there's something here. So, but that may be just like, you have to find ways to work with that, but that overwhelm. But sometimes the overwhelm is literally, there's so many chaotic pieces, and I'm trying to keep them in some kind of order. So sometimes it's actually just like letting all of that just be, and actually tapping into the stillness that underlies it all. This is in the category of thing that I need to say because I think there's something in it. And yet I'm aware in saying it that it's easy to say. Yeah. So be very gentle with your tender human heart. Yeah. And take care of yourself as much as you can in this process in a relative way. Don't be too hard on yourself, but also don't think that meditating and awareness are the same thing. Or beingness needs meditation to exist. Sometimes unhooking from that, just lay on the floor and see if you can find the beingness that's here throughout. It's actually not any better or worse when you're feeling positive, and it's no better off when you're feeling positive and uplifted, and no worse off when you're feeling drained and overwhelmed. It just is. I find I go in and out of this awareness. I don't live in it. Is that your experience? I would take issue with that. How do you know you don't live in it? You don't think you live in it because you go in and out of being caught up in stuff. That's normal. Is that my experience, that I go in and out of being caught up in thoughts and feelings? Yes. But I know I don't get confused about what's here all the time. So I still get caught up, of course. I get caught up in different things than before, and certain things much less than previously. Yeah. Does that mean I won't get caught up in anything in any given moment? No. I could get caught up. But I'm not confused about that. I don't think that means something about what I am. That may not seem like a material difference, but it is. So I would take issue with that for you. When you say, I find I go in and out of this awareness, I think what you mean is, I experience being in touch with and not in touch with this awareness. That is the experience you're having. So I would say the same thing to you. How do you know the experience of going out of it? Maybe you don't notice the moment you go out of it, but being out of it. How do you know that happened? So good. You can continue with that inquiry. When difficult emotions like stress, anxiety, and anger are present, for me, often all three collide together at once. I like that description of how like many often come together. I try to accept it and ride it out, but that doesn't lessen or dissipate the emotions. And it can be very hard. Is it better to ride it out, let it dissipate on its own, or is it wise to try to alleviate the emotions through meditation or other methods? There's no right or wrong here in that. Either one is fine. The purpose of being present with those emotions in that way of watching them arise, exploring how they move and change, and watching them fade away. The purpose of that is not that that's the most skillful way to handle an emotion. The purpose of that is to see deeply into the nature of your experience, of what emotions are, how they affect you, what that energy is, and it's for you to practice being with those energies in different ways. It's not that like that's the best method to ride out any kind of thing. No, sometimes the most effective thing, if you have to like show up for your children in a given moment, is to just change it, like suppress it, right? Or it's not that in any given moment that might be more skillful. Or you could use meditation to put your attention on something else, or to calm down your body and your breathing, to shift your nervous system. So at any moment, you could use any of your methods depending on what's skillful for you. But that aspect of understanding the nature of the emotions as experience and getting comfortable running the energy of those states, that has its own value. And over time, does that affect your capacity to be with these explosions of energy in the body and mind? It does. Just like riding waves, is a skill for surfers. So, so that is a skill to cultivate, and it can be hard to practice that way or to want to. But in any given moment, you can use any of your strategies. There is a value in learning that, I will say. Yeah. There's a tremendous value in learning what is an emotion experientially. What is anger like? How does it happen? Yeah. What are the signs and sensations? And can I be with that energy without fighting against it, without being taken over by it? Can I allow it to run within the system without it being, or to take up space without locking it in? That's a skill. When we stay with emotions like that, we learn something about their nature too, and also the nature of that which is not bound by the emotion. So, yeah. When I notice my thoughts / mind chatter, it always feels like the noticing is the same thing that is conducting the chatter. It sometimes feels like my mind has a split personality as opposed to a sense of separate observation. I'm having a hard time separating myself from the chatter. How do I create the space not to identify with my thoughts? Well, you don't have to create space. Well, let's see. Split personality as opposed to a sense of separate observation. You don't have to have a sense of separate observation. Observation is enough. I think if you're trying to separate it, you want it to be like, oh, this is going to be like space here. You don't have to do that. That's extra. Sometimes you will perceive that there's a sense of the spaciousness is not actually the distance between awareness and an object. It's hard to describe. That's the way it's the way it seems at times. The space is actually the space that comes with non-grasping or non-identification. That's the spaciousness. Actually, the knowing of it happens right with the thing itself. Just like the illumination is not, the light is not separate from what it's touching. It's just right there with what it's, actually, I don't know how it works with light. let me not go beyond my scope of knowledge, but with awareness, yeah, you don't have to, just that it's knowing it is enough. And as you, now watching your own mind or being aware with thinking, that takes practice, right? Because thinking is we're very used to being, just to being in our thinking, not to have thinking as an object. So don't worry if that takes practice. Yeah. I'm not used to listening to mental chatter as opposed to just like, that's what I'm thinking. Like but is he gonna come tomorrow, or is she gonna call, or do they care? You know, usually it's like, you know, but instead of like, is he gonna call tomorrow? It's like, that's arising, and there's some, and it's being known. You don't have to know it separately. That's enough. Oh, and as you stay present with chatter coming and going, you'll start to get a sense that this chatter comes and goes. It's different at different times. You know, you're identified with these thoughts, but you start to see as you watch chatter enough or listen to chatter enough, so like, this is all very inconsistent. Which chatterer are you? Messages are very different. They're very conflicting and contradictory. You'll start to see it's not a, you know, they're just what you heard or what so-and-so said or from a long time ago. And yet it's, as you get more used to it being known, just the knowing of it is enough. It doesn't have to feel separate or spacious. That will start to naturally, you will start to naturally disidentify without it being an intentional move, just that kind of relaxing. Yeah, just like when you're swimming, you start to naturally, just from experience, learn how to relax in the water. Even maybe you did it a little bit initially, just like consciously trying to, but you can't totally because you don't know how to swim yet. So that natural, you start to naturally start to relax. So it's enough to know it, the chatter. And usually when you're not that practiced at watching the mind, as soon as you observe some thought, there's a thought about it. And usually what happens is you identify with that thought. That's why it seems like the observing is what's doing the chattering. But actually, no, there's just more chattering about the chattering, all arising right here and being known. Yeah. So everybody wants the result of not being identified with thinking, but nobody wants to do the part of watching the thoughts, watching the mind, watching these terrible movies over and over again. They're not terrible because they're so horrible, although some of them seem very scary. They're terrible because if you start to notice, it's so boring. It's so repetitive. It's so much the same stuff. It's like it's like a movie that's like by some, like the worst B level movie. A lot of the chatter is like that. Not that of course there's much more to you that comes out as we stop completely being in the chatter all the time. So I think that's all I'll say about that. Maybe we'll take one last one. How does one find a meditation teacher? Are there qualifications or experiences to look for or to look out for? I don't know. Let me think. Well, one of the benefits of this day and age is that there are a lot of people teaching, and they're not that inaccessible often in terms of like, at least their public teaching. Not everybody, you don't always find teachers who are available for questions or you can dialogue with, but directly with, but So it's very hard to say generally, but are there qualifications or experiences? Yeah, but what's really hard about that is it's like I don't know that much about cars, right? So when I go to a mechanic, I'm sure there are qualifications that make somebody a really good mechanic, but I'm not that good at discerning that. Like I can't tell who's just trying to like get me to pay for something that I don't need to pay for and who's like just really telling me the truth. You know? So that's what's really hard thing about like it's almost like yeah there are lots of qualifications that if you've been practicing for a long time they're like not that hard to spot like who's kind of fairly full of it and who there's something there or who's like just like it's just like seems to be like a lot of ego in the field and who has that those ego elements at least they're not don't seem to be leading, right? um, so but I think it's very hard to discern that, but I think the few things I would say is you know trust yourself rather than other people and don't check your mind at the door, which is to say like don't just don't overlook things that seem wrong to you. If things like you can still stay open-minded if something feels off to you, but trust your like intuition about that. Like, oh, that doesn't seem right. Don't just, oh, the person has a very wise looking, long beard, or he has the shaved head haircut, so he, probably knows, or he has some lineage, pedigree, or whatever. Trust your intuition and keep your eyes open. It's good to find a teacher you resonate with. That's sort of important. Somebody could have the best teaching, but if it doesn't like activate something in you or resonate with you, then they're probably not your teacher. And I've had that experience many times. People say, oh, so-and-so is an amazing teacher. I say like, yeah, but I don't feel it. And so you need to have a teacher where you can feel it. And I don't know what that is. Is that karma or chemistry or some kind of sensibility, but I think that is important too. And then there are a lot of things to look out for. I think the main one is checking your intelligence, because somebody's like a meditation person or a spiritual person. Your intelligence is important to keep in the room, and your intuition too. And with that, you can have a teacher for a while and then have another teacher. Sometimes you have a teacher for a time. But what I look for in people is just I look for that kind of flavor of the awareness that's not in the content. Yeah, and along with that, the lack of a feeling that there's like this project underway, whether it's a self-aggrandizing project or a project of building an empire or of getting somewhere or getting you to the place you're supposed to be because you're not there. And that aspect I look for is like, oh, that where it feels like a big project. That's something I always, that I look for where that's absent, where there's awareness and availability or presence, but not this big project, and where the teaching is not located in the teacher in the sense that like I'm going to own the wisdom here, and you all can tell me if, hey, Will, you said that, but I actually feel like you're owning, you're doing that thing. I welcome that reflection because that, that'll be helpful for me. Sometimes hard to see oneself at times or see when one's caught in something. So, but yeah, that thing of like, I've got it, I'm going to give it to you, but I'm just going to give you little bits of it, and like, and then you looking for how this, like a place where the students never kind of develop on their own and aren't like allowed to like leave or graduate or just kind of be their own beacon. So that's to look out for in my view, but all those things can be challenging sometimes to recognize in the beginning. So I think just entering what you resonate with and keeping your eyes open. And yeah, there should be some flavor of selflessness or of even just of spaciousness. That's important. And also that's different. This is hard to describe, but awakeness or is different than charisma. You know, some people and some teachers have a lot of power. Yeah, because if you, through meditation, you can develop a lot of power. You know, the mind, when it's very concentrated, and sometimes it can be described, you know, people sometimes can describe experience. It sounds like that person's really enlightened, you know, it's like, oh, wow, it's some spacious and vast. And it's like, they could be describing a kind of concentrated state that doesn't have the flavor of, but their behavior is very like operating, you know, and so it's what you look for is that flavor of selflessness, regardless of how much charisma or personal power there is or compellingness. Because some people are very like a current for energy, and they can be very powerful. And you know, sometimes cult leaders can be like that. It's like a lot of magnetism, and sometimes that does have a kind of energetic element that people can confuse for liberation. Those are really two different animals. And sometimes it's different enough for conventional people. So conventional meaning like you didn't have a paradigm for like spiritual energy or something, or meditative concentration. You sit with somebody and their mind is so powerful that yours gets really quiet or feels like it just goes into a concentrated state. Yeah, and that can just be power. That can be just concentration, like tremendous amounts of concentration. But it's to look for that flavor of selflessness, not or the flavor of like power, ego thing, because that's power. And sometimes I don't want to go on too much about this, but nowadays we don't talk enough about the path of power, right? It's like this stuff, and I'm not encouraging this, but like, you know, the kind of meditative arts, when they're not approached with an intention of liberation or of like seeing the nature or beingness as like, you can actually use them to become more powerful psychically in a way, or energetically, just literally through concentration and through the energy side of things. And that's and if that's run by kind of the quote unquote ego or selfishness or lust for power, that becomes very bad, or I should say very dangerous. And there's plenty of talk about that in the various traditions, you know, and that's what that's what that's what Darth Vader is. Darth Vader is the Jedi side about power, but that's not just in Star Wars. People can go that way meditatively. Now, most people don't practice enough, or they don't have the facility to get that powerful. This takes a bunch of conditions coming together, and you know, a certain kind of mind. But that happens. Yeah, it's like that does happen. Some people have a facility, and they also have some, you know, and the paramis for it to go in the liberation side, the freedom side, the being side, the love side. And some people have that other conditioning that it's just so thick, and there's not a desire to see for freedom. It's just the accumulation of power, and you can, yeah. So I shouldn't, and maybe for some people that's an advertisement for that side, but I hope not. So some teachers have that flavor, you know, it's like, and sometimes it takes a little while to recognize it. Not that common, you know, but teachers within this past generation have had that, and we've heard stories about it. Okay, I think that's good enough for now. I think we can sit and formally close, and yeah. So why don't we do a little dedication, and then I'll leave the chat on for a few minutes if you want to say goodnight. But even though we've talked about many things, don't forget the first part of what I was talking about, just that which allows this all to appear. Close your eyes, the world, the visual field disappears, and yet awareness is still present. Just without the visual field, open your eyes, and the world appears through seeing. Now, it must be true with any of the senses. There's something here throughout all of it. Okay, so may each of us, and in our own way, continue to look deeply into the nature of things and into the nature of our own being, presence, awareness. And may we be willing to see things as they are. And may this clear seeing, this clear knowing, free us. And may this be for the benefit of all beings, everywhere. Thank you all, and I'm glad we could be here together. And I look forward to sitting with some of you in the mornings this week. Please keep coming back again and again to what's primary, and I will see you soon.